probably the preeminent libertarian argument in favor of its ends, that being self-ownership, consent, property rights, was provided by Hans-Hermann Hoppe in the form of Argumentation ethics. Today we're going to be having a long-form discussion about this idea. Let's get into it. He has a plan, she has a plan, and you get to pay for it regardless.
The best way to get someone motivated is to stand for something strongly, deeply, passionately.
Subscribe to Disenthrall.
Do as you're told.
Greetings, argumentatives. Welcome back to Disenthrall. I will be Patrick Smith. Today I'm here with my co-host, Christian. How you doing, Christian?
I'm doing fantastic. How about you?
Oh, man. I'm a little excited, a little intimidated, a little bit nervous. Maybe not nervous. No, I'm confident. It's just... I hope people take this video in the light that it's intended. That's my main thing. We've spent an inordinate amount of time criticizing other libertarian ideas on this channel. And honestly, Christian, that's not why I started this channel. But it's become why I do this channel. And it's been an interesting shift. When I started the channel, the idea was to make content to disenthrall people, to like wake them up to the hidden gun in the room, the involuntary authority of government, the invalidity of the consent of the governed ideas, stuff like this, to really wake people up. And I've done quite a bit of content like that. And so have you on your channel, over 10 years we've been doing this now. But over time, it's evolved into more like deep dives into the philosophies and the thinkers behind libertarianism. And this is like in large part to this is how my brain works. I'm not content to just accept someone else's argument at face value. That's why I'm not a statist anymore. It's in my personal nature to just continue drilling until I hit bedrock. And that doesn't stop just because I've accepted libertarian conclusions. No, I demand that we be able to justify libertarian conclusions with more than just magic spells, more of the same magic spells that the state uses to convince people that if you don't like the rules, you can just leave. Like, we have to do better. And I'm not comfortable with the state of things. And rather than just bitch, I put the work in. We critique things. We refine ideas. We challenge ideas. We write our own ideas, which you've recently helped me with in what I consider to be a fine start to what will likely be a lot of writing that we have left to do, called anti-subjectivism. So that's what I wanted to start with. Like, what about you? I want to give you your, a chance to crack the book in your way.
Yeah. Just, even with the opening title, I'm sure people will come in here with a feels one way or another. Feels very negative towards what they see. Think the attitude of the video is going to be people who are pro it. That's not really what we're here to do. I wouldn't consider myself pro or anti-Hoppe or anything like that. What we're going to be doing today is taking a look at an argument that is very often used by libertarians in order to try to justify all sorts of conclusions off of, and basically to build foundation for libertarianism for a lot of people. And we're going to put it to the paces. And we've obviously done a lot of that. And so you'll get to see some of our conclusions through here. But yeah, I mean, that's the whole point of this. We're not attacking Hoppe. We're not attacking any of you who like Hoppe specifically. What we're trying to do is clear the room, make sure everyone's aware of what the concepts we're talking about are, and then how they apply to argumentation ethics.
Now, if you've watched any content on this channel, one of the first things you always hear when I put out a critique style video of anyone's ideas is usually something along the lines of, well, first of all, you either see the person I'm critiquing on the screen talking through it with me, which is by far what I prefer. Unfortunately, Hoppe did not respond to his invitation, but who are we? This is not me being entitled. He, we are owed nothing by Hans by any means, but unfortunately, he's not on the screen with us today. And we invited some other people like Kinsella, who's by far his probably most public proponent, especially in terms of argumentation ethics, most prolific, certainly, written in terms of his writing on the topic and other video appearances and interviews and debates and such. He was not available for the show either. There was a few other people that also hold to argumentation ethics that are interested in having conversations on it. We didn't have any of those people on the show today because because most of the other people involved have their own derivations and contexts and ideas around argumentation ethics. And we wanted to keep this video super focused on argumentation ethics provided by Hoppe. So what we're going to do today is kind of a hybrid approach. We are going to kind of put our ideas out there. We're going to put our criticisms out there. And then we're going to give everyone watching, if you disagree with us, if you think we're wrong, if you have cogent, clear, prepared counter arguments for us, you have an open invitation to the front of the line to join us on a follow-up live stream. I don't like the back and forth debate bro talking head shit that happens on YouTube where people just jump cut up each other's videos and do takedowns. So if you're watching this and you disagree, please don't do that. Please just take us up on our very polite, respectful not counter offer, but offer to come on the show and talk through it and tell us why we're wrong. I want to know if I'm wrong. I enjoy learning when I'm wrong. So please, and this goes for those cartoon YouTubers that don't use their real names ever. That goes for you guys too. I don't usually interview a lot of that on the channel, but you are welcome too. If you have cogent, polite, clear, prepared counter arguments, open invitation. Don't do the talking head, unproductive bullshit that's just for drama stirring and clout chasing. Come on the show and let's talk through it. Just interrupt anytime you want, Christian. I'm going to keep going.
I think it's all good.
Yeah, so we're here to be as constructive and charitable and deliver our critiques with as much respect as we would want somebody to deliver towards our ideas. If you guys are out there and you're critiquing anti-subjectivism, number one, again, open invitation to come on the show and teach me how I'm wrong. I love learning that. I don't care about winning debates or winning points or showing other people up to try and get views, clicks, and subscribers, obviously. Come on the show. Let's talk through it. Let's do it. Another thing I want to say is that this video is likely the start of a conversation, not some kind of hard conclusion with a period at the end of it and where we leave it with no more interest or willingness to look into these ideas further. If we're wrong, we want to know. I want to believe as many true things as I can and as few false things as I can. So let's consider this the start of a conversation, not the end of it. And the last thing I'll say for the intro, hey, look, we have slides today. Boom. We wanted to do this show as a live stream. Number one, because I prefer the live stream format. It's more informal. It allows us to interact with the audience, take questions, take challenges. If we're unclear on something, people will tell us in the comments and we can address it right then. But that makes the content much longer and kind of harder for some people to watch that prefer to digest their information in short form clips. So what we'll probably end up doing is taking this live stream just like we did with Passio, and we'll probably do a shortened jump cut version of this live stream for the people that need to, that don't want to watch a longer, potentially multi-hour stream. That will come for you. It'll probably be called Argumentation Ethics is Not a Moral Philosophy, Meat and Potatoes, or something like that. All right, cool. So today we're gonna have like a hangout session. We're gonna talk through this. We're gonna present our ideas. We're gonna have a good time doing it with you, wonderful, wonderful viewers. Good to see you all in chat, and I think we have more viewers on Odysee than we do YouTube, which always just warms my heart. Man. 13 on Odysee, good. 8 on YouTube. Look at that. You guys are lovely.
The real winners.
Anything else, Christian, in terms of like an intro before we get started?
Yeah, no, I think the next place is to just kind of jump right in. It's a little bit of kind of framing of the conversation. And so, if you guys have watched some of our content before, we've done something kind of similar to this for both Rothbard's natural law theory and for Passio's natural law theory. And both of those let's be honest, they were pretty straightforward. We said, hey, let's do a stream about this thing. We'll go through it as much as possible. And for, in the Passio case, it was a 13, 14 hour live stream. And in Rothbard's, we just read his work and critiqued it as we went along. And yeah, it was a pretty straightforward process. Didn't take a ton of research on our end in order to come to the conclusions that we had. We were familiar with the work to begin with. And, going into it, it was pretty easy to jump in. This, however, started as it was kind of intended to be the same sort of thing. We had a picture in the beginning for like, okay, yeah, we could do a video on this, but let's do some research. Let's make sure we're not missing anything. And what we wound up doing was digging through several months, almost half a year of rabbit holes and new readings, new writings, new videos to watch, people to talk to. And it has completely changed at least my understanding of argumentation ethics. And as a result, most of the things that were going to be brought up in that original video that was kind of pitched in our minds all those months ago have entirely changed. What we have now is a completely reoriented understanding of both the work and our criticisms of it. So this will be interesting as well, because you might be experiencing, if you've ever heard, I think I've talked about it casually a few times in some other videos, you might hear differing perspectives than you had in the past. And I think that a large part of that is to be expected with the amount of work that's gone into the research of going through our ideas, writing critiques, getting Steelman arguments in front of them, and figuring out where we wanted to finally put the button on all of this, or tie as they say. That's all of that work has gone into this moment.
Yes. And, not to fire off too many strays, but yeah, like researching Passio's conception of natural law took a couple weeks. Researching Rothbard's conception of natural law was very simple because it just almost immediately failed to the fact-value dichotomy. Unfortunately. Man's reason... Anyway, go watch that video if you want to learn about that. This one has been months. I looked at my Twitter DMs when I first approached Kinsella about us being about ready. I thought at the time, we're about ready to do a show on this. Will you come on? And it was 6 months. 6 months ago since I thought we were ready to do the show on this. And here we are today. It was 6 months of additional reading, additional thinking, reading more after that, talking to proponents of argumentation ethics multiple times, having our existing ideas that we thought were defeaters disproven and shot down, and we were corrected on them. Then there was more reading and more thinking, more checking our work with thinkers, both inside libertarianism and philosopher, like trained philosophers outside that aren't libertarians, just bouncing the ideas around as a lot of the sources that we could trust to help us think through it. And I think it's worth saying that like most of our initial counter arguments were defeated throughout this process, which is really cool. I've really enjoyed this. Like this stuff is fun for me, and there's little I like more than being proven wrong. And there's been quite a bit of it. And all of that is to say that is all to this man's credit. Like Hop is kind of a badass. He's done a good job here. This is definitely, and Christian, feel free to disagree if you do, but I think this is the most well thought out libertarian set of ideas that I've encountered yet. And so I want, again, like I want this stream to be seen in that light. Like, this guy is a badass. He's done better than I think any other libertarian thinker in these areas so far. Correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think I'm being hyperbolic, Christian. So this is all delivered with like due respect and reverence towards the end of furthering libertarian ideas. And that's what we're trying to do. We can't further, we can't refine, we can't sharpen our rhetorical knives, our philosophical blades, if we don't wet them, if we don't test them, if we don't sharpen them, if we don't critique each other. And that's the that's how this is presented. Okay, enough dithering. Hopefully I've communicated that. Good Lord. It's been 15 minutes
and there's
already.
just one more just one more quick thing. This has to be said before we go any further. This is really a conversation in two parts. And what I mean in saying that is that part of this conversation is going to be directed at people who I will charitably say have misinterpreted argumentation ethics into something it isn't. Title might give you a little hint on that. And the other group is going to be the people who are very knowledgeable on Hoppe, very knowledgeable on the correct way to interpret argumentation ethics and the contexts that are necessary in order to understand the arguments. And it'll be, I think, pretty obvious whenever we're having these two conversations in mind. But, you know, if you're someone who is particularly knowledgeable about argumentation ethics, and you see an argument that says, well, this isn't addressing argumentation ethics, that's not what Hoppe wrote about, recognize that to a certain extent, this what we're doing is in the context of a broader conversation happening in libertarianism about argumentation ethics. And it has to be brought up in this video. Otherwise, it feels like we're skipping something. You know, this is not happening in a vacuum. There's a larger discussion going on here, and we need to keep that in mind as we move forward. Yeah,
it's not it's kind of a spectrum, not autism, maybe. The vast majority of people that quote unquote follow or ascribe argumentation ethics have it wrong. They communicate it poorly or completely inaccurately. They defend it even worse. They argue for it using bad arguments, and then when those bad arguments are defeated, the people defeating those bad arguments think that they have successfully dealt with or, you know, dismissed argumentation ethics as an idea because, you know, all the stuff the people that didn't know what they were talking about said was a shitty way of saying it. They didn't do a good job. So it's almost like the biggest enemy of argumentation ethics is like the people, the majority of the people trying to communicate it without really understanding. There's a lot of bumper stickering terms like performative contradiction around. Like, a lot of these people have no idea what a performative contradiction is, means, or how it's used, or what it's for, or what it can and what it can't do. They just say, anytime somebody argues for something they don't like, they just slap the performative contradiction bumper sticker on it and then walk away, like, triumphantly. We're going to get into that in as much detail as anyone would want. And look, if you're subscribed to Disenthrall, this is what you're looking for. You're not looking for fun music videos. So let's get into it. Shall we begin with what is argumentation ethics? Go for it. Take it away.
Yeah, so I think argumentation ethics is the best way to do this, in my opinion, is to take it from the horse's mouth. You know, I could sit here and give you all sorts of things and summaries of what I think argumentation ethics is, but we're pulling straight from Hoppe in what's called the PFP 163, as most people refer to it as. You can find it both on YouTube spoken and also on online in text if you ever want to review this again. But Hoppe goes out of his way to try to outline what his argument in a series of premises and then ending in a conclusion. So that's, you know, I think the best place to start is going to be right with that, so we can go over it, make sure we're all on the same page about what does Hoppe actually say about argumentation ethics, and then we can move on from there.
Yeah, I mean, let's describe it in shorthand first and then get into it. And okay, let's start with the shorthand. And I wrote this down. This is kind of sort of my summary, and I think Christian agrees with this. I think most people would. Argumentation ethics says that there are normative presuppositions embedded in the act of argumentation, which cannot be disputed using argumentation. These presuppositions also leave one in a state of performative contradiction when attempting to argue against common libertarian normative claims such as self-ownership, non-aggression, and property rights. So that's it in a nutshell. That's what we're going to be talking about today, is this argument that you cannot argue for anti-libertarian ends without contradicting yourself by the very act of choosing to argue. How did I do, Christian? Is that you think that's good? All right.
Yeah, I think it's pretty good.
So then, and props to Christian for this. I'll take it full screen here. Christian spent a significant amount of time parsing a dialectic into a series of premises. And I'll complain about that later. But for right now, Christian, I'll let you introduce this and talk through it. You broke this text up into premises and a conclusion in the best way you could. And we'll talk about that, why that is after, I suppose. But you're welcome to go ahead.
Yeah, so this is Hoppe's argument as he presented it in PFP 163. It's outlined in such a way that it was pretty easy to take his words and just, premise, conclusion. Even if he doesn't, just explicitly outline it that way, it certainly seems to be framed in a way to where that's what we're supposed to do with it. But we'll just go through it real quick. For premise one, we have that, and I should say this first. Each premise begins with a that as well as the conclusion. So this is kind of how he's signifying that this is the beginning of a new statement or idea. So I included it just to make sure that, we weren't accused of editorializing any of his quotes. This is all literally copy pasted from the document. So for premise one, we have all truth claims, all claims that a given proposition is true, false, indeterminate, or undecidable, or that an argument is valid and complete or not, are raised, justified, and decided upon in the course of an argumentation. Very specific usage of the word argumentation there, just to make sure people are picking up on that. For premise two, we have the truth of this proposition cannot be disputed without falling into contradiction, as any attempt to do so would itself have to come up in the form of an argument. Hence, the a priori of argumentation. And if you feel like interrupting at any point, Patrick, just let me know.
Yeah, I'm trying to. I don't want to nitpick this part as we go through it. Like you were trying to say. Let's just get it. Let's get the argument out there, and then we can parse it.
Cool. Premise three is argumentation is not free-floating sounds, but a human action, i.e., a purposeful human activity employing physical means, a person's body, and various external things, in order to reach a specific end or goal, the attainment of agreement concerning the truth value of a given proposition or argument. And then premise four, while motivated by some initial disagreement, dispute, or conflict concerning the validity of some truth claim, every argumentation between a proponent and an opponent is itself a conflict-free, mutually agreed upon, peaceful form of interaction aimed at resolving the initial disagreement and reaching some mutually agreed on answer as to the truth value of a given proposition or argument.
All right.
Next, we have premise five. The truth or validity of the norms or rules of action that make argumentation between a proponent and opponent at all possible, the praxeological presuppositions of argumentation, cannot be argumentatively disputed without falling into a pragmatic or performative contradiction. Then premise six, the praxeological presuppositions of argumentation then, i.e., what makes argumentation as a specific form of truth-seeking activity possible, are twofold. A, each person must be entitled to exclusive control or ownership of his physical body, the very mean that he and only he can control directly at will, so as to be able to act independently of one another and come to a conclusion on his own, i.e., autonomously. And B, for the same reason of mutually independent standing and autonomy, both proponent and opponent must be entitled to their respective prior possessions, i.e., the exclusive control of all other external means of action appropriated indirectly by them prior to and independent of one another and prior to the onset of their argumentation. And then we have one more for the conclusion, and this is the big one. Any argument to the contrary, that either the proponent or the opponent is not entitled to the exclusive ownership of his body and all prior possessions, cannot be defended without falling into a pragmatic or performative contradiction. 4, by engaging in an argumentation, both proponent and opponent demonstrate that they seek a peaceful, conflict-free resolution to whatever disagreement gave rise to their arguments. Yet to deny one person the right to self-ownership and prior possessions is to deny his autonomy and his autonomous standing in a trial of arguments. It affirms instead dependency and conflict, i.e., heteronomy, rather than conflict-free and autonomously reached agreement, and is thus contrary to the very purpose of argumentation.
Okay, so now that we put everybody to sleep, let me just check. Oh, yep, no viewers left. Okay.
We checked off that box.
This is why you're here, right?
Exactly.
Okay. So, I think we could break down or categorize our critiques into 3 categories. We have like a bunch of small scattershot stuff that we can go back through the argument we just read and kind of point out some weak spots and some flaws and some weird stuff and some bare assertions. Then category 2 is like some solid attacks against some of the premises in this argument, which we could get to. And then there's basically like, we're going to finish the video by rolling up the aircraft carrier, launching all the fighters, and doing a full broadside at the foundation of this argument. And I don't think I'm overstating it. I think we can do that. So before we talk about why we named the stream what we did and begin maybe the actual assault, why don't we go back through those premises and just do the scattershot stuff? Like I'm not talking about like, these aren't our foundational claims against the thing, and we're not going to live and die on this video by this stuff, but there is some stuff in here that I think deserves pointing out. Are you cool with that, Christian? Does that sound good? So I'm going to back this up.
Yep, that works.
Okay. All right. So going back to premise 1, there's some interesting groundwork being laid here in premise 1, defining truth claims and how all claims that a given proposition is true, false, indeterminate, or undecidable, or that an argument is valid, incomplete, or not, are raised, justified, and decided upon in the course of an argumentation. There is, and I don't want to say games, there's almost some word games happening back and forth between different versions of the word argument, argumentation. Argumentation is an action. Argumentation defined very specifically and narrowly as a conversation between 2 people, both who are sort of genuinely and absent any coercion seeking truth, which of course, like there's many other forms of argumentation that are just as truth apt as 2 people discussing normative claims. It just bears pointing out that as we go through here, there's some things being smuggled in, maybe not maliciously, but nevertheless, saying all truth claims can only be decided in the course of an argumentation. And, as we see in the later premises, he has a very specific definition for what argumentation means, is easily disproven. Like, we can work on proving a truth claim through various modes of communication and various modes of argumentation. We'll get into that more later. I just wanted to kind of bookmark or highlight this point in the premise as a weak spot. And one of our later salvos is going to exploit this weak spot to show a problem here. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I just think something we can tie in really quickly, just that you were talking about, is premise 2 immediately does the thing you were talking about with argumentation, some of this language being just a little bit sloppy, just to be honest about it. And it makes parsing through some of these statements a little more difficult than I think is necessary, and also could present some issues. So it's good that we bring this up now, because this stuff will be coming up again for our more core arguments. So whether or not this is not a knockdown, drag out criticism of argumentation ethics, just to make sure that's clear again for everybody, but it is worth mentioning.
The word argumentation being used in multiple forms back and forth. It's like Mott and Bailey might be a way too strong version of what I'm trying to point out here. But it's like when it benefits him, he'll use one form of argumentation, one sense or tense of argumentation, and when it doesn't, well, he's just using it the other way. Don't criticize me, bro. You got to be careful with how he's using it, because when he sometimes when he says argumentation, he means colloquially, like somebody putting out a proposition for other people to take in and evaluate. And other times, no, he means two humans arguing over normative claims, both that are free of coercion, both that are not in the midst of some kind. Well, see, okay.
Only truth seeking.
Brief point of ranting. The fact that we've had to parse his long form writing into a propositional argument is a big problem. And this is not, we'll get to this later. I'm jumping ahead. Not having a proof, not having him say premise 1, premise 2, premise 3, conclusion in a very clear, short form, concise form makes this very difficult, because we have to, in many ways, try and stay charitable and project onto him what we think he means in each of the times he uses these words. So it makes it very difficult for people trying to understand what he's proposing specifically. It makes it difficult to understand because he did not provide a proof. He provided a long form document or a long form paper. And I was commenting to Christian, man, every time I'm definitely jumping ahead. So I'll wait. Okay. So is there anything else you'd like to say about, premise 1, 2, 3, 4?
No, I think generally, these are all right. Yeah.
Okay. Anything about 5 or 6?
Yeah, I mean, just to say it again, I kind of cheekily said this is the big one, but premise 6 is where basically the rubber meets the road for pretty much everything. This is where self-ownership is introduced into conversation, and while we will be getting to it later, so we're not going to do a whole dive onto this point. He uses some interesting language that even other writers have commented on, such as in premise 6, this must be titled to exclusive control or ownership of his physical body. These present some, there's a couple of different ways you can interpret that we'll get to when we get to that section, but these are just things to keep in mind as we move forward.
Somebody in chat said, how does it state in premise 1 that argumentation is used to determine all truth claims? It says all truth claims are raised, justified, and decided upon in the course of an argumentation. That's Hoppe's words. That's how it's
PFP 163.
Yep. Okay. So I think it was a mistake to try and go back through and do the little nitpicky stuff. Let's just launch the attack. Okay. A big problem. And this is one I already kind of jumped ahead to. He didn't provide a prop.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Did we do what A is not? A is not. Yeah.
I'm terrible at this. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so we wanted to finally address the title of the video, and the big thing. This is going to be the simplest thing that we have to say about argumentation ethics, and this comes back to the two-part conversation again. So many people present argumentation ethics as if it is a moral philosophy, as if it is a moral foundation for libertarianism, as if it justifies libertarian values, as if it has any normative content to it whatsoever. And this is not coming from, like, it doesn't. It just doesn't. You know, just rip the Band-Aid off. It does not have any of those things. Sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
I was just going to ask you, for the people following along that don't know, that aren't like autistic nerds like ourselves, what normative means. I want to make sure that we don't leave anybody behind.
Yeah, so normally we have this thing called the normative quality that we talk about a lot in philosophy. It's you can think of it as kind of like the counter to the descriptive quality, right? So normative qualities are represented by oughts. So an example of normative claim is we ought not attack innocent people or aggress against people who have done no wrong, etc. These are all example of normative claims. And so when we say AE isn't a moral philosophy, what we're talking about is that it is not a system that proposes a set of principles that gives us an equation for evaluating interactions within a normative context, within that ought context. If we go back through the argument again, you know, if you were to go back, if you're listening and, you know, post, you can go back and listen through the whole thing again. There's no instance where Hoppe is saying, this is what you should do. This is what you ought to do. This is what's good. This is what's bad. None of that is happening. What he's explaining is he's trying to outline a description of what you can and cannot argue about. That is the whole goal of argumentation ethics. And this has to be cleared up, because I can tell you so much time has been spent thinking that this was ever supposed to be brought up as a moral philosophy, when it was never the case, never Hoppe's intention, nor anywhere insinuated in the text that this was supposed to be a moral philosophy.
Yeah, and so the reason why we titled the video that is because, by and large, I think the majority of argumentation ethicists, let's say, treat it like it is one. And these are the people that don't really understand what they're talking about. And so we wanted to address the largest percentage of the population up front, not to make them butthurt, but just to be as clear as possible. This has nothing to do with disproving the argument itself. This is like, we're just backing up and pointing something out. The point of this argument, Hoppe got the argument from a guy named Habermas, who was trying to form it into a pro-socialism argument, and trying to show that it was some sort of performative contradiction to not work towards socialist ends. I didn't examine those ideas too much, so I could be misstating it. But he saw the tactic that was being used there and tried to convert it into one that could be used towards libertarian ends rather than socialist ends. Good on him, first of all. But it turns out that socialists just can't think very well, and we'll get into that later. But this is an argument that tries to tell you certain arguments are not valid, or that certain arguments can't be made without contradiction, without contradicting yourself when you're making the argument. It does not contain any shoulds. It doesn't contain, and that's another way of saying normative claims. It doesn't tell you what you should do. It doesn't tell you what you should not do. It doesn't contain any shoulds. There were no shoulds in there. It tries to tell you what you can't argue for without contradiction. And so it must be said to anyone living life like this, like their moral philosophy is argumentation ethics. It's not one. It's an argument against arguments. It's an argument from argument that tells you what you can't argue. There we go. Is that clear? Jesus.
There we go.
Okay. So the title of this video and that topic, that point, was for the amateurs, the large group of Hoppians, not Hoppians. Hoppianism is probably differentiated from argumentation ethics, but argumentation ethicists. And I put in my notes that I already kind of said it. These are the greatest enemies of argumentation ethics, might be the amateur followers. And it leads people that know how to think about this stuff to dismiss all of argumentation ethics way faster than they should. And I was in that boat early on. You know, I took in some of the crappy arguments from some of the crappy followers and was misled with a lot of my rebuttals. Not applying my rebuttals. A lot of my rebuttals didn't apply early on. Okay, are we good with that? I will try not to jump ahead and back, and we're just going to go straight forward. This is my bad. Okay, so a big problem. This goes to my rant. We didn't get a proof. Hoppe did not give us a proof. He gave us a dialectic. He gave us a paper written with all the premises using a lot of words. Christian tried his hardest for several days to actually try to systematize it into a proof. He even tried to begin using symbolic logic to identify the inferences being used, going through the argument. He ended up with something like 13 variables, and it was it looked like a very complex. It looked like you could probably navigate to Mars in a spaceship with the math that he was doing on this thing. And that's not. And I'm not saying it's argumentation ethics' fault that it's hard to interpret. I'm saying it's kind of Hoppe's fault for not giving us a precise, concise, propositional argument. He gave us a bunch of text, and text it requires a lot more interpretation, and we have to try and be charitable. Well, what do we really think he meant here? What did he mean here? Did he mean that? Well, these two spots sound contradictory. What is he? Is he Motte and Baileying the word argumentation? And is argumentation just like the process of constructing a proposition, or is argumentation two people arguing in good faith, absent coercion, two humans? Like, a lot of question marks here. And if you go to the proponents of argumentation ethics, God help you. I'm speaking from like direct pain here. Now there has been some really good, and we're going to thank them at the end of this talk. There's been some really good people that we have spoken to that were not fog-headed people. I don't want to insult a lot of people. If you go to the proponents for secondary interpretations of these words, because we don't have a proof, you're in for a world of hurt, because you get mutually exclusive, contradictory interpretations of the same words, which again goes to the criticism. You gotta provide propositions. It doesn't mean Hoppe's wrong that he didn't provide a propositional, concise format. It is a red flag that there might be some messy thinking going on, and it needs to be examined further before just accepting it. And when I was talking to Christian a week or two ago about this objection for this video, I said, holy shit, Christian, we didn't put our proposition in the Anti-Subjectivist Manifesto. So this applies to us as well. And this is self-criticism as well. We're going to go back and add that very soon, because it's so important. I mean, I think we kind of made it a lot clearer in there than Hoppe did in this document. But anyway, it needs to be said. You have to have clear and concise arguments so people can follow the logic. Any thoughts there?
No, I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head. It's one thing to be able to, to give a complicated argument in text and you just have to parse through it and whatever. It's another thing to have extended interpretations of the work that have to pull from a lot of different areas in order to build like a cohesive idea. And, I'm not, again, as much as it can be frustrating, this is not a defeater in and of itself. It's just important to note that if you guys feel like we missed anything that's just, obvious in your understanding of argumentation ethics, there's a good chance that this is the reason why, that we had to do what effectively comes down to translating words into ideas in outside of the author's direct context. And we used the initial argument as much as possible. But as you'll see with some of the stuff coming up, or like the description that we gave of what an argument is, some of those things are not necessarily explicit to what an argumentation or an argument must be from the beginning premise. So again, just moving forward, this had to be brought up.
Okay. All right, cool. All right. Well, let's launch our first real attack then. This is going to be the control versus property. Now, this is not unique to us. Other people have levied this as a critique before, but I think we're going to expand on it and tighten the screws on it further. Do you want to lay it out, Christian, or you want me to?
Yeah, so it comes back to that the same portion I pointed to earlier in the initial argument by Hoppe, where he talks about this notion of exclusive control or ownership. So when he's talking about ownership, he's talking about ownership over your body. And I believe it's in premise 6 there, or maybe?
Was it 6? Okay.
One of those premises. I think so.
Yep, that's it.
Yeah,
6.
must be entitled to exclusive control or ownership of his physical body. And this is interesting because there's really 3 ways you could take this. And we'll focus on the most popular 2 first, and then we'll kind of move on from there. We can say that exclusive control or ownership is trying to get at the same idea for people who may not understand the language. So we're just talking about self-ownership the whole way around. You could also say that exclusive control is directly tied to Hoppe's concept of humans having self-ownership. However, I think all of these introduce some issues as far as what it is to have exclusive control over something and what it is for something to be property. And for anybody who, might be new to the topic or haven't heard some formalized definitions, it is generally speaking, a pretty popular understanding of property is the right to exclude someone from the use of a thing, or you could say from the control of a thing. That's another way you can actually put that. And in the concept of exclusive control, as Hoppe presents it to us, we seem to be talking about the ability to, exclusively control the body, to be able to move my arm independently. I'm the only one who can activate those neurons and raise my arm. And so these 2 ideas are being brought into combat with one another, whether or not it was intentional, by placing them in this, what I believe to be inclusive or of exclusive control or ownership.
Go ahead.
Sorry. I was just going to say this, just to wrap up, this is, like we said earlier, we're getting into the weeds here, but this is a really important distinction because Hoppe's argument relies on self-ownership. It does not work. Hence why exclusive control is secondary to the concept of self-ownership in argumentation ethics. Argumentation ethics is about people not being able to argue against self-ownership. And if self-ownership can't be directly tied back to the other premises as a necessary inclusion, then it doesn't follow that self-ownership is a necessary, it leads to the conclusion, if that makes sense.
Let me try to say the same thing. Oops, wrong button. In my own words to take a crack at it, because it's kind of nuanced and difficult to get clear. There is a difference between control of a thing and ownership of a thing. I currently have both ownership of this body and control of this body. It is possible for a different person to be the owner of something that you have control of. So, so many examples. My brain's having a hard time picking one. Let's say that I lose my phone walking down the street, and my neighbor picks it up. He knows it's mine, but he's keeping it for me. He has control of that piece of property. I have ownership of it. I have the right to exclusive control over that thing. It doesn't mean that I currently have control over that thing. And when we're talking about necessary presuppositions to engage in argumentation with somebody, you can't just assume the maximal set of presuppositions in an interaction, especially if you're going to try and make it forced on someone by the very nature of argumentation itself. If you're going to think about presuppositions involved in argumentation, you need to start with the minimum. What is the bare minimum set of assumptions that someone has to sort of acknowledge, or they can't really enter into an argument with somebody else? And it's certainly not the right to exclusive control of one of the things let's say, doing the argument. It's just exclusive control over it. These are two different concepts. So if we don't have to presume ownership rights, then the whole rest of the argument goes out the window. All we have to presume is that the person we're arguing with has control over their body. And now we're no longer precluded from arguing for anti-libertarian norms like, hey, I'm going to argue that I should attack you to get what I want. And in no way is that argument to that person presuming that they own themselves. No, it's presuming that they have control of themselves. An inconvenient form of control to me, certainly. Like, man, it's certainly inconvenient that you have exclusive control over your body, Christian. And so maybe as a matter of expediency, not any kind of principled position, I'm going to attempt engaging in argument with you first before I proceed to attacking, because I'm not presuming that you own yourself. I'm not presuming any normative claims that I should not attack you by arguing with you. I'm engaging in argumentation with you because you happen to inconveniently be the one in control of that body of yours. And it would probably be easier if I could just convince you of what I want rather than forcing you. So I'm going to try that first. So if you don't have to presume full-on libertarian property norms like self-ownership and non-aggression, a lot of this falls apart. And I think that's a pretty solid attack that, and I've read the back and forth on it. I have not seen a good defeater to that distinction between property and control. And just to head off counter arguments, there is a sphere, and it usually aligns actually with argumentation ethicists that think that it's impossible for one to not be both in control and not a self-owner of one's body participating in argumentation. That's a separate video, but just to bumper sticker it, because we're talking about it here, it would seem to be like easily disproven. Because again, like the people that are making the argument, like Kinsella, that you can't sort of sell yourself into slavery, seem to be conflating the idea that exclusive control is equivalent to ownership, which is the right to control. But they're different things. Somebody else could have the right to control over my body and just not currently possess that control. And in the future, we can certainly imagine, Elon giving us a brain chip that might make it possible for them to take control. Also, the right to ownership doesn't mean that you can't be an owner if you don't currently have control. Otherwise, as soon as a thief steals something, you're no longer the owner, and we've kind of erased theft as a crime. There has to be a distinction between the right to exclude others or the right to have control over something and the empirical fact of reality of whoever currently has the control. Who empirically currently has control is different as a concept entirely from who ought. It's empirical versus normative. Who has versus who ought to have control. We can't conflate these two. And when we see the distinction between the two, this kind of falls apart because you don't have to, just by assuming one, you're not automatically assuming the full-on property owner. All I have to assume for this argument is that you have control. Did I beat that dead horse clear enough? I mean, let me know in chat if I'm not making sense or if this is all turning into mush for you guys. We'll continue flogging the horse. All right, cool. I have just been logged out. So Christian, if you will take a moment, I'm going to handle this.
Yeah. So just to, kind of, what's the easiest way of saying this? Just to kind of reorient our perspective on this. Reason that it seems like it could be just a little word thing. Like, okay, well, he has self-ownership in here. The point is that self-ownership is being kind of inserted at this premise as a necessary conclusion based off of the previous end. So all of those things, when I was reading through the premises, each one of those requirements in order to be engaged in argumentation must necessarily lead to the concept of self-ownership. We actually have something I didn't plan to talk about, but another issue here is that we don't even have self-ownership defined here wholly, in my opinion. outside of a context that could also be taken equally with exclusive control. So that is the big thing here, is that when there needs to be a meaningful distinction between exclusive control and self-ownership, there isn't. And there also isn't the need for self-ownership in the argument as given, where exclusive control alone wouldn't also work for itself. And since exclusive control is an empirical idea, where self-ownership is a normative idea, we have to have additional justification to include this concept of self-ownership.
Yeah, and he justifies needing to presume some of this for it to be considered a valid argument by, pointing out that they have to be free to reach their own conclusions, which, makes sense. But all that's required, the minimum required to reach one's own conclusions, is to currently be in control. And just to brain in a vat, nerd out on it for a second. Even if you're arguing with somebody that currently has a brain chip in controlling the body, then the argument just moves up a level, and now you're having a valid argumentation with whoever's controlling the brain chip. So, and it's still just control, not property. Okay. Hopefully we did that well enough. I know there's going to be dissenters, but we welcome them. Let's talk through it. Okay, so we did a big problem. We did a bigger problem. Now it's time for the broadside. We're going to pull out the big guns now. So we started by making the point, kind of a meta point, a zoomed out point. It's not a moral philosophy. It doesn't provide oughts. It doesn't hand out normative claims or any normatives. Then we pointed out a problem with one of its premises being the control versus property problem, and also sort of the unsubstantiated claim in premise one. I mentioned this earlier, that all truth claims are decided in the course of this style of argumentation, which is it's so clearly not the case that I'm confused as to it was several times throughout the course of the research on this that I'm like, wait a second, that's so obviously false. What am I missing? Because I'm constantly trying to be charitable when I'm critiquing other people's work, and I'm trying to put myself in their shoes. What did he mean by that doesn't make this obviously not true? There's obviously many modes of communicating and making argumentation and making truth claims. That's what I mean. There's many modes of evaluating truth claims outside of argumentation. Anyway, so that's what we've done so far. Those have been kind of, we'll call them medium strength criticisms. This one, this is the end. This will be the one. I want to make sure that this is taken constructively. The point of working on libertarian philosophy is so that we can present our ideas to non-libertarians and convince them towards libertarian ends. And just like with our Passio critique stream, just like with Rothbard falling to Hume's guillotine, the fact-value dichotomy, if our ideas are fundamentally flawed, when we present them to people outside of the libertarian space that know how to think about this stuff, they'll be dismissed. And I don't want that. I don't want our ideas to be dismissed by people that know how to think. This is, if anybody outside of the libertarian sphere sees this, that knows how to think about philosophy and logic and reason, this will be the thing that they just say, oh, well, hold on, that doesn't follow. That's not a thing. That's really a pretty cool, thing that you just said there, but it's meaningless, and they're going to move on with their socialist asses and continue pointing government guns at you. And I don't want that. That's not okay. And so the purpose of this stream and the purpose of this critique is to say, okay, guys, this was cool. This was a great attempt. This was the best attempt so far, but it's not sufficient. Let's continue. Let's continue working. Let's not stop with Hoppe and say we're done. And rest on this, because it's not it. Let's recognize the truth of the situation, realize why it doesn't work, so that we can move on to better things and keep doing the work to find the libertarian philosophies. Anything you want to say, Christian, before I launch the broadside?
Nope. You put a lot of work into modeling this up, so I think that's all the intro we need.
Okay. The apocalyptic problem. Let's start by talking about what a performative contradiction is. A performative contradiction is when the propositional content of a statement contradicts the presuppositions of asserting it. Now, I want to make sure that we bring as many people along with us as possible because this language is esoteric. And this particular topic, this performative contradiction topic, is esoteric even amongst normal philosophy and normal thinkers of philosophy. When we talk to philosophy thinkers outside of libertarianism, a lot of times we have to start by describing what a performative contradiction is because it's just not part of what a lot of what they're taught and what they think about. And Christian just went through several years of collegiate level philosophical training, and why don't you speak to that if that matches your experience, Christian?
Yeah, I mean, as far as performative contradictions not ever coming up, not to get too far ahead of ourselves, but they kind of were brought up. I knew them by a different name at the time, and it was kind of interesting having. I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves as far as towards the justification of this, but yeah, it's not a well used argument in philosophy, particularly moral philosophy, because it presents with it a couple of problems that Patrick here has done some great work in setting up. So I want to pass the torch back to him.
Okay.
This is your baby.
So I want to lay out exactly what a performative contradiction is, and I want to also describe for you that there's like a hard version of a performative contradiction that serves as a real problem with the soundness of an argument. And then there's a soft version of performative contradiction that basically evaluates to an accusation of hypocrisy. That's the headline. That's actually low key the full broadside barrage that we're about to lay out for you here. But let's take time with each missile being launched, shall we? Okay, so let's start with a hard example of a performative contradiction. If Patrick said to you one of the four of the follow or these four phrases, and I've got them in columns and rows because they're different types of phrases. There's empirical phrases, which means appeals to facts of reality, things that are real and testable and solid and objective, let's say. And there are normative statements, which talk about shoulds and oughts and what should be and what ought to be and what ought not to be and what should not be. Those are normative statements. And then across the rows, you have particular statements, which means statements that are talking about individual things or people. And then you have universal statements, which are talking about all things or all people. And so you can break performative contradictions down, at least for the purposes of argumentation ethics, let's say, into these four types. And let's talk about each one going down the list. So you have an empirical particular claim. If Patrick said to you, Patrick cannot speak, I cannot speak effectively. This is me making an argument to you, and also in the process of making that argument to you, I'm providing a sidecar, let's say, of evidence, a package of evidence along with the argument that shows the argument to be objectively false. So I've made an argument, that's here. Hopefully you can see me. I've made an argument, that's here. And then along with the argument, packaged with it, on the side here, I've presented evidence that the argument is unsound. And remember the difference between validity and soundness. Validity means that the argument, the premises and the conclusion, the logic is sound. Or sorry, the logic. Jesus, I'm terrible at this. The logic is valid, meaning it makes logical sense. The conclusion follows from the premises. It doesn't mean that the premises are sound, which means true. if somebody else makes the argument that Patrick cannot speak, they're not presenting any empirical evidence along with the argument. It's somebody else saying that Patrick can't speak. The argument could be valid. We don't know if it's sound. We don't know if it's true. We don't know if Patrick can't speak, but it can exist in the premises of somebody else making the argument. And it could be a valid argument. Hopefully I'm doing a good job at this. So the performative contradiction is when you present an argument with a sidecar of evidence that proves that the argument piece is unsound. Could be a valid argument, but it's unsound. How do we know? Because of the sidecar of evidence. Patrick just told me he can't speak. So clearly whatever the contents of this argument was is unsound. The second one I'll address here is universal empirical. This would be if Patrick told you, no one can speak. Well, again, I've made an argument over here and I've presented it with a sidecar of evidence that at least one person can speak. Patrick just did it. So this argument is unsound. Objectively unsound, meaning it's not a good argument. No one should take it seriously. No rational person would believe in the conclusion of that argument because it was presented with empirical contradictory evidence. Argumentation ethics is not addressing either of those claims that I just made. Argumentation ethics is not, when it's talking about argumentation between two people, it's not talking about empirical claims about the facts of reality. Argumentation ethics is limiting itself to normative claims, and that's a problem. Let's get into it. So a particular normative claim would be Patrick telling you, Patrick, me, I should never speak. I should never speak would be a normative claim. And this goes to what we were talking about earlier. The maximal claim that one can make is that Patrick is acting like he thinks that Patrick should speak because he's making that argument to you. The claim itself is untouched by his mode of communicating the argument. Patrick's argument could in fact be true that Patrick should never speak, in spite of Patrick's disgusting speaking behavior. This is not a performative contradiction. Let me say that again, because this is where the shell coming out of the battleship hits the foundation of argumentation ethics. Just because I'm acting like I should speak, just because there's a sidecar of evidence that suggests that Patrick in his head thinks that Patrick should speak, even though the words coming out of Patrick's mouth, the argument being presented to you over here, is making the case as valid as can be, let's say, that Patrick should never speak. And he's presenting it with a sidecar of evidence that Patrick in his head thinks that Patrick should speak. When you're talking about normative claims, the sidecar of evidence revealing what Patrick actually thinks about whether or not he should speak doesn't at all in any way speak to the soundness of the argument he's presenting. Why? Because he could be being a hypocrite. And a hypocrite can still make valid and sound arguments while being a hypocrite. You have to separate the argument from the person making them. Because the person making them with normative claims is not presenting objective information that addresses the argument itself. Am I doing a good job, Christian?
Yeah, you're killing it.
Okay, I hope I am. And so let's move on, and then we're going to kind of go over this several times because it's foundational and it's destructive to argumentation ethics. So again, as another example, if Patrick said to you, no one should ever speak, and let's say, he's got premise 1, premise 2, and a conclusion. He's got a propositional argument ready for you here, and he's presenting it with a sidecar of evidence that Patrick thinks at least one person should speak. Well, what Patrick thinks doesn't matter for the argument. He's got a premise 1, a premise 2, premise 50, and a conclusion. And that stands, or it lives or dies, stands or falls on its own merits. There's propositions and a conclusion. What Patrick thinks is just, it's a subjective thing that doesn't address the actual argument in play. Because Patrick could just be being a hypocrite. And a person being a hypocrite can say true things. There you go. I finally found a way to put the words together in a way that makes sense. A hypocrite can say true things while being a hypocrite. Just because somebody is a hypocrite doesn't mean that the things they're saying are false. And I'm jumping ahead again. So let me just leave that there, and we'll pick it back up and paint the counter argument for you 17 more times. So, Christian, do you want to hit this before I move on to the next example?
No, keep it going. We got a good pace here. I like it. Good energy.
All right. Okay, so I want to change one aspect of the argument on the screen. And it's in the first line of text on the screen where it says, if Patrick said to you. I want to change the mode of argumentation. This goes to the problem in premise 1 that we talked about earlier. If you saw those same words, it's no longer Patrick saying the things to you. Now you're walking down the street and you're seeing the following words spray painted on a wall. They are still arguments. They could have premises and they could have conclusions. And you can still process them to see if they contain or provide truth value. You're just walking down the street and you see the stuff written on a wall. You see the words, Patrick cannot speak, written on a wall. That's not a performative contradiction. Why? Because no evidence is provided as to Patrick's speaking ability. It's spray paint words on a wall. It's an argument written on a wall. No one can speak. Exact same thing. Patrick should never speak are the words written on the wall. Again, merely by changing the mode of communication, the mode of communicating the proposition to you, we have eliminated the objection provided by argumentation ethics. The exact same argument provided by a different method. It's no longer a performative contradiction. It wasn't a performative contradiction before, but I'm trying to illustrate how the mode of communication is kind of what's being roped into argumentation ethics. And then I'll get to why that's a problem later. But the same thing for no one should ever speak. We're seeing words on a wall. Constitutes a valid argument. It has premises. It has a conclusion. It can be evaluated for truth claims. But now that you don't have that sidecar of evidence to attempt to prove it unsound, you've got nothing. And it's a normative claim. So even if you had a sidecar of evidence, you've still got nothing because it's a normative claim. And here's the headline, right? Performative contradictions are only really weighty, important, something that you cannot ignore. That's the way to say it. Performative contradictions are only something that you cannot ignore when they are addressing objective or empirical claims that can be hard proven false. If it's a normative claim, you're off in the realm of subjectivity. You're off in the realm of what people are acting like and their motivations for their behaviors and praxeology and all that good stuff. But you have gone from this sidecar of evidence disproves the conclusion of this argument that it came with to this sidecar of evidence at best can just prove that the person was being a hypocrite, which has nothing to say about the truth or falsehood of the argument it was presented next to. Okay. Did I get that? Yeah. Just for other examples, other modes of communication that don't convey performative contradictions with this speaking example, which is would be things like if you thought it, if you think an argument, proposition, conclusion, you're evaluating the argument for a truth claim, and there's no performative contradiction because you're thinking it, reading it. If you were, that was the wall example. Hearing it indirectly, not from Patrick, you could hear the exact same argument from another person without the performative contradiction. Sign language, smoke signals. So the point is the mode of Patrick said this is only important because that particular mode itself is directly, objectively, or empirically contradictive of the conclusion. Hopefully I'm doing well here. Okay. Let's tighten the screws further. Now we're going to try it with an anti-libertarian argument, just to make it really, really clear. If Patrick said mode, that's the mode of communication. Patrick is now saying it. If Patrick said to you, I can use force to take what I want from you. This is a particular empirical argument. Again, the empirical ones are not what argumentation ethics is looking for. This is an empirical one because I'm saying that I can use force. I have the capacity to use force. I have the means to use force against you. No evidence is provided along with this argument to speak to my force-using capacities. So this is not a performative contradiction. Next up, we have the universal empirical. Everyone can use force to take what they want from you. Again, no evidence is provided in this little tiny one-sentence argument as to everyone's force-using capacities, though that would probably be pretty easily disproven with other evidence. But it's not a performative contradiction because nothing about Patrick saying that to you contradicts it empirically. Number 3, this is a particular normative. Now we're into argumentation ethics land. I say to you, I should use force to take what I want from you. Well, like we talked about earlier, the maximal claim that one could make about Patrick is that he is currently, in the process of making this argument, is currently acting like he thinks that Patrick should not use force to take what he wants from you. But the claim itself, the proposition, or the premise, conclusion, the argument he gave you in his words, even if he's acting like he shouldn't use force, that argument is untouched by Patrick's mode of communicating instead of using force. Patrick chose a mode of communication that precluded, that delivered a sidecar of evidence that Patrick doesn't actually think that he should use force to get what he wants from you. But that doesn't mean that his argument isn't valid. It doesn't mean that his argument isn't sound, and it doesn't mean that his argument isn't true. It just means that he's being a hypocrite. So in spite of Patrick's disgusting argumentative behavior that he is arguing against, he could be right. He could be presenting it. So again, and this is the defeating shot into Argumentation Ethics Foundation, it's not a performative contradiction. All the people out there saying that it's a performative contradiction to argue in favor of anti-libertarian ends, it's not. Because if one is a hypocrite, I'm going to say this over and over, a person being a hypocrite does not speak to the truth value of the argument being presented along with his hypocrisy. And we'll get to what people are going to say in response to me here in a second, but let's finish this out. Again, everyone should use force to take what they want from you. Same as number 3. It could, in fact, be true that everyone should use force instead of argumentation in spite of Patrick's terrible, crappy behavior of choosing argumentation instead of force. All right. There you go. I did
it. And did it brilliantly, might I add.
I hope so.
I think this, just going right into it, like I feel like Patrick here did a fantastic job, along with the awesome little charts here to help guide everybody through why a performative contradiction does not speak to the truth value of the statement or proposition question in any given argumentation or argument, right? And all of these that were given were conclusions, right? If you need to in your head, you can make these into syllogisms, whatever. The point stands that the performative contradiction does not speak to the truth value of whatever they are saying. What it is trying to be said here, though, is that they are hypocrites, like we said earlier. And this goes into a very particular fallacy known as tu quoque, which is a very fancy word for calling someone a hypocrite. Just to give the full definition of it, it's a discussion technique that intends to discredit the opponent's argument by attacking the opponent's own personal behavior and actions as being inconsistent with their argument, therefore accusing hypocrisy. This is fallacious. It is in the book as a subset of the argumentum ad hominem, and I'm sure a lot more people are familiar with that. This is a type of ad hom. That is all that this is. If your whole argument comes down to you are a hypocrite, therefore I will not listen to you, I will not consider the truth value of your statement, you are engaged in fallacious reasoning, and you need to stop. We've said this a billion times, but I feel like just to make sure it is completely clear, nothing else about cause argument matters. The rest of it could be all true, completely true on its face. The performative contradiction in no way is suggesting that it is impossible to make an argument for socialism. All it is saying is that you are a hypocrite for doing so, and if you try to shut down someone's argument by calling them a hypocrite, you are engaged in fallacious reasoning.
Or if you say that their argument is false because they're a hypocrite, that is an ad hom fallacy. That is tu quoque, or tu quoque if you're in ancient Latin.
Yeah.
So, I just to ramble a little bit more about tu quoque. It doesn't always rise to the level of a fallacy when it's just used in conversation. But when you use the tactic in an actual argument, then it bumps up to an ad hom. Now it no longer follows non sequitur for the reasons of argumentum ad hominem. It does not follow. You're insulting something that is that doesn't pertain to the truth value of the argument being presented, unless it's an empirical claim. And the evidence provided in the course of argumentation contradicts it empirically. Now, one of the things I feel argumentation ethicists saying to me right now, because you hear, well, I don't even feel it. You see them say this to people on Twitter all the time when they argue for this stuff, and they say things like, and you know what? I'm even going to broaden this more to be self-critical, because my research over the past several months into this has made me realize that arguments I was using over the past 10 years, some of them did this, especially was when I was in my very early libertarian Stefan Molyneux phase. And I'm probably going to do a video on this because I believe early on in this channel, my earliest videos, I was repeating some arguments from Molyneux that commit this exact same thing by trying to say that he always did these like two people in a room can't both argue for the initiation of force. And I think I haven't examined it fully yet, but I'm pretty sure that I made a mistake in back then when I was affirming those arguments. So maybe we need to do a Molyneux video soon to redress this problem with those arguments back then. But again, like, I'm doing this because I love learning when I'm wrong, because when I learn I'm wrong, I usually learn that I learn what the actual truth is. So this has been fascinating. I've really enjoyed my dive into argumentation ethics. To Hoppus credit. Okay, so the thing that you get back is this. You get one of several phrases back when you point this stuff out to people. They'll say that someone cannot present an argument because they're hypocritical. Well, first of all, that's just empirically false. They can present the argument even if they're hypocritical. But that's kind of a soft one. What I've seen more often from argumentation ethicist followers is asserting that they should not present an argument because they are caught in a performative contradiction and they should be ignored. Their arguments should be ignored because they're performatively contradicting themselves. This is equivalent to saying they should not make that argument because they're hypocrites. Well, as we've just illustrated with the tu quoque fallacy, asserting that someone should not present an argument merely because they're being hypocritical is an opinion statement, not a performative contradiction causing the argument itself to be proven false. Example. It's a really clarifying example. We could have a fat libertarian. Sorry, shots fired at myself. We could have a fat libertarian making the argument that everyone should maintain a healthy body weight. And in the course of making this argument to you, they are literally shoveling in spoonfuls of raw sugar and drinking pancake syrup while arguing with you that everyone should maintain a healthy body weight. Premise 1, premise 2, conclusion, everyone should maintain a healthy body weight. But they are performatively contradicting the shit out of themselves by actively eating sugar and drinking syrup while they're making that argument, because they're showing that they actually don't think that everyone should maintain a healthy body weight. They're being hypocritical while making the argument. But does that mean that the argument is false, that everyone should not maintain a healthy body weight? Of course not. The two are completely unrelated. The fact that they're drinking syrup and shoveling sugar into their mouths has nothing to do with the truth value of the content of their proposition. We're going to repeat ourselves to hopefully everyone, even in the back rows, can get this. You can be a complete, silly, absurd hypocrite and still say something that is true. I feel like I'm repeating myself, but I feel like I'm saying it in different ways to hopefully catch different people. Okay. Okay, so we've got some people say you cannot present an argument because you're contradicting yourself. Some people say you should not. And then other people say they proclaim that one should ignore arguments made by people being hypocritical. Again, this is just another opinion statement. And it's more insidious than that because, and this one stands out to me every time I hear somebody say it, because I really try and live by this mantra that I want to believe as many true things as I can and as few false things as I can. And if I walk away from arguments made even by hypocrites, I am leaving myself in danger of continuing to believe false things that might have been disproven by the hypocrite making a valid and sound argument. Or the opposite. He might have had information to teach me something new or to disprove something that I thought I knew. And if I walk away from people's arguments for bad reasons, like ad hominems to quoques, I leave myself in danger of believing more bad things. This is like, and I've even said this before, back in the Molyneux days, I remember saying it, like, and Molyneux says this, you wouldn't buy a diet book written by a fat person. And it's the same kind of idea. So when we're normally living, yeah, it'd probably be stupid to buy a diet book from a fat person because that's kind of a red flag that they don't know how to maintain a healthy body weight. So why would I buy a diet book from them? Yeah. Colloquially, that makes sense. But it doesn't mean that the stuff in their diet book won't give you a healthy body weight if you follow it. So there's a difference between like red flags for bad ideas and truth value. They're different things. There again, I said it like a 17th way. People are going to just be like, okay, goddamn, Patrick, I got it. Shut up. So the final point I want to make in this section is that arguments live and die on their own merits and don't require a human to even be involved in outside of yourself, outside of your own mind. You can take in an argument, you can process it, you can determine its truth value. Somebody said that people's actions are part of the argument. So their actions when they're delivering the argument become part of the argument, sort of without the person even consenting. Now you're just straight up straw manning them by including premises in their argument that they didn't want in there, even if it's hypocritical. It's just a straight up straw man. So what I wrote here is, arguments live and die on their own merits and don't require a human to be involved. Forcing perceived human motivations into people's arguments as premises can cause an instant straw man, making your rebuttal invalid. Now, you can choose to ignore it if you want. You can be like, oh, that guy's a hypocrite. I'm not going to listen to his argument. But you are choosing to leave yourself in danger of continuing to believe false things. Okay.
Yeah, and just to harp on this really quick, the kind of reasoning involved in taking someone's actions and converting them into an additional premise of the argument requires a lot of really shallow inference. And I'm talking like the simplest possible explanation must be it, right? So in the case of any of the arguments before, you would have to be saying you have to do this mental gymnastics where you believe that the person is doing the action for the sake of the action, right? So if it's somebody arguing for socialism or the fat libertarian who's shoveling sugar into his mouth, The reason that they're doing this is because they value that action as a good. You have to convert. They value the action in itself is the cleanest way of stating it. Whereas there are a billion possible reasons why somebody might be doing any given action. All that you can say about an action is that they're doing it and something drove them to do it. You don't have any idea what that drive to do it is. You can't speak to their intentions or their deepest desires. People could be arguing for expediency. They could be shoveling sugar in their mouth because they're addicted and they legitimately think that it's bad for them, but they can't stop, like physiologically or whatever. There's so many other explanations other than, oh no, they are arguing, they value argumentation and thus self-ownership. Oh no, they're eating sugar, they value being fat. It does not follow. It's not fair to the person making the arguments, and we shouldn't do stuff like that. You see socialists do sloppy stuff like this all of the time. It's a little different, but just to get you into the mindset, it's like, oh, this guy's arguing for capitalism. Like, he's just greedy. He wants what's best for himself. That is the same idea of taking something that you're doing and getting out of it something that is nowhere to be found in the arguments that are being made. So we shouldn't do it for socialists. We shouldn't, just like we wouldn't want people to do it to us.
Well said. Said it better than me. Okay. So, bookend. That argument is concluded. Now I want to provide a little bonus argument just to illustrate another thing that I blew past while talking about performative contradictions, and that is the changing of the modes as another illustration of how we're defeating this argument. So again, back to my graph. Last time I promised. If we take those same claims and change them to words written on a wall, we again completely sidestep argumentation ethics. Patrick can use force to take what he wants from you, words written on a wall. No evidence was provided by those words written on a wall as to Patrick's force using capacities. Again, same for everyone. And then we go over to normative. Patrick should use force to take what he wants from you. Same. The words written on a wall, there's no performative contradiction. Patrick's not there making any claims. Those are just a disembodied argument, a disembodied proposition that could very well be true written on a wall. No performative contradiction. Same for the universal version. If all I have to do to turn what you would consider a failing argument into a valid one is just change the way I deliver the argument to you, to just about any other mode of communicating besides the person presenting it, then maybe the problem is not the argument. Maybe we're just illustrating a narrow, limited, specific weakness of that specific form of communication. The specific form of communication means that Patrick is a hypocrite when he makes certain arguments. Well, that just might be a limitation of that mode of communication or that mode of argument, because all the other modes of argument are able to offer that exact same argument without the problem that you're referencing. So if all I have to do is change the mode to get around your objection, then maybe the problem isn't the argument. Maybe the problem is just, hey, we have a specific mode that has a limitation. Anything you want to say on that?
Nope. I think you perfect.
Okay. All right. Go for it, Christian. I've been talking my ass up.
Yeah. So for the sake of rigor, we wanted to make sure that we did a little bit of anticipating the objections. And we're not totally done with the presentation yet, but if you're in the chat and you want to start thinking of some questions, now might be a good time, because we're going to start addressing some ones that we thought would be or have seen as good potential objections to what the things that we've said. And we're going to start, because this is, like we said, a bifurcated conversation. We have to start with not a moral philosophy. And we're not going to spend a lot of time on these in particular, but I think they are nonetheless important, because at least one person, yes, you, I'm talking about you, whoever you are feeling one of these ways right now. So
like, if you have a question, you're curious about something we said, type question in all caps so I see it in the chat, because I'm watching chat on 3 different websites. if you have a challenge, you think we're wrong, and you have like a challenge type question or something, put like challenge in all caps so I make sure and see those. We're happy to address them. And if you have something really meaty, again, open invitation. Come on the show. Go ahead, Christian.
Yeah, so for the non-moral philosophy challenges, we've got these is more like categories of disagreements. So all three of them can pretty much be addressed in the same way for the not a moral philosophy. We've heard people say it's talking about normative statements, therefore it's a moral philosophy. It reinforces or is the foundation for libertarian ethics, or that it supplies a framework which for libertarian law, which is another way of, in my opinion, pretty much saying the exact same thing. And all three of these do not at all address whether or not it is a moral philosophy. And the reason that these are the most common objections is because, like we talked about earlier, unfortunately, it seems to be a misunderstanding on what constitutes a moral philosophy. So the objections aren't even really getting at the heart of it. I know that it can be easy to, on first glance, see this argument as one that's trying to make some kind of claim. Like, it's almost an implied, some people will say, it's implied in argumentation ethics that if you can argue for no other system, then of course libertarianism is the good system in this theory. But that's not what Hoppe wrote. That's not what anyone who, Kinsella or any of these other guys represents argumentation ethics as, and it's not something that I believe is in argumentation ethics favor.
There's a lot of like nerdy details in philosophy that we could bring up here. I'm going to limit it to one. I get one, okay? There is a tendency to invert the order of importance with math and logic. So it goes like this. We have sense data on reality. So reality is the base level. We sense reality. On top of that, we build a system to categorize reality. We find that it's consistent. We derive the laws of logic from that on top of that. And on top of the rules of logic, we get all of, argumentation and propositional logic and everything else that we build on that. And then, and scientists will do this too, they'll design a scientific theory using valid and sound math and valid and sound logic. And then they'll declare what must be in reality based on that. Now, I'm not saying like I just described what a scientific model is, a theory. They see if their theory can predict reality. It's not what I'm talking about. There are people that have a tendency to invert the causality, and because math and logic conclude this, or because math and logic can't conclude this, reality must be this way. They're inverting the causality of the system of math, logic, reason, evidence, science, observation, rules of logic, and making it causal upon reality instead of descriptive of it. And just to be super nerdy in this particular discussion, even if we were to say that using our system of logic and propositional logic and argumentation, let's just say, I don't think it's happened here, but let's just say that we've truly proven somehow that it is impossible to argue for anti-libertarian ends. Therefore, in reality, we get an ought now. Like now there is an ought down in the base reality layer that says we ought not do anti-libertarian things because we up here in our 4-step derived interpreted layer called logic and propositional reasoning, we can't do something. That's not how it works. You start with reality and you derive all these systems to describe it up here. And if your system up here says something about reality, it doesn't mean that reality is like that. Your system could be flawed. And of course, we found many, many times throughout history that our systems of even math itself can be flawed when projecting it back down on reality. So you don't get to invert causality there. Sorry, that was a super eclectic point to make, but it happens a lot.
It's a fair one.
And it screws people up. It screws people up in their thinking. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, it's a fair one to make. I think there's quite a bit of guiltiness of that going on in the context of this conversation. Any other things you want to close up on before we move on from not a moral philosophy?
I think our definition of a moral philosophy bears pointing out here. We wrote this down earlier, and I think it's a good one. A moral philosophy is a theory or set of principles that provides an equation for evaluating interactions within its normative context. And so just to reflect that on our definition of philosophy, it doesn't meet any of those. It doesn't meet that. There's no normative claims in there. And a couple people have gone to great lengths, far beyond what Hoppe would approve of, to try and extrapolate normative claims from this, what they would describe as, what Hoppe and Kinsella would, I'm pretty sure, describe as a limited, like legalistic argumentation limiter. People are trying to take that and vacuum form it into a full-on moral philosophy. How is that?
If you just add an ought to the last premise, it makes it all moral philosophy. That's all you had to do, guys. That's it. Just give us one with an ought in it.
Yep.
All right. So the next group of potential objections we have is for the control versus property. And these, just, I can't remember if we said this or not, so just a quick reminder. These potential objections are going to be getting at some of the weeds of the conversation. So we will try our best to work through them, but we may be touching on some other concepts. We'll try to keep them brief and as contained to AE as possible. But the first one is one that is a potential argument you could make. A lot of libertarians have this conception, and I'm not going to project it onto Hoppe, but it's a conception that could be brought to bear against our objections to argumentation ethics. And that's that exclusive control of human bodies directly relates to self-ownership. Therefore, the distinction drawn by us and the implications of that distinction are moot to the conversation. So, do you want to take it, or?
Go ahead.
Yeah, so if you just accept the criticism on its face, that there is no meaningful distinction between self-ownership and exclusive control, what we've effectively done is make a case of special pleading for humans. Exclusive control is, like, no other property is measured on our degree of controlness of it. Property is about the right to exclude or control, the right to exclude from control of a thing, not the capacity to it. So rather than us evaluating, like, how much do I control this phone right now in order to say whether or not I own it, what we're talking about is whether I have a right to that thing. So even if we were to conflate self-ownership and exclusive control, I don't think that's in argumentation ethics' favor. I think it's just another way of getting us to the exact same problem again, where we're just saying self-ownership twice. How did we get to self-ownership? Well, or we're saying exclusive control twice and it's supposed to mean self-ownership. Again, we said it before, but I think just having these ideas this closely related to one another brings out all sorts of problems with the theory.
Yeah, the exclusive control thing was never mentioned in other areas of that argument. It was like he slipped it in to sort of catch people trying to go for this problem by just including it in one of the premises. Yeah, I mean self-exclusive ownership or ownership. I think that was an error, actually. Like, if he had just said self-ownership, I think it would have been a more solid premise. Because maybe not even then, because it a lot of it feels like baseless assertion. He didn't back up the exclusive control part. He just inserted it in there to shut me up, I guess. But I really don't think it fits in there because, well, I don't want to repeat myself for reasons we talked about earlier. Yeah. All right, I'll do the next.
So, okay, go for it. Yeah.
You can't have the praxeological presuppositions of argumentation with control alone. You need self-ownership. Therefore, if the presuppositions are correct, the result must be self-ownership. You wrote this.
I think we touched on this a bit.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. We touched on this a bit earlier, but ultimately what we're talking about, this argumentation, I've used the phrase, we've both, I think, used the phrase platonic to describe it in colloquial terms as this, like, ideal argumentation that Hoppe is talking about, where it's two people engaged in a normative conversation that is entirely conflict-free and violence-free and involves purely truth-seeking intentions and behaviors. Nowhere in there that I can find is necessarily requires you to be an owner of yourself. So I have to essentially reject the objection on its face, in that what needs to be done is to be explained like, no, this is the one where you can't just have control over yourself. You have to have the right to your own ownership. And I think it's an easy mistake to make, or it's easier even to draw in other exterior libertarian ideas and try to project them onto the praxeological presuppositions and say, oh, that kind of looks like this idea that we got in self-ownership. So that must be what he's talking about. But I don't, we talked about this earlier, so I'll say it again and then I'll hop off of it. It doesn't seem to be the case that self-ownership necessarily follows from the praxeological presuppositions. It seems like exclusive control is all that you need to make those happen, which again is just another ding that the fact that exclusive control had to be brought in here, I think, was intentional and needed to happen, but is also opening up a whole other set of issues.
Why don't you go ahead and do the next one as well? You wrote that one too, so you're already in the headspace.
Yeah, and this is, control or ownership. It doesn't matter. Control, this whole thing is just a meaningless deflection from argumentation ethics. It still stands as is. Putting all of the performative contradiction stuff aside, literally all of it, if we don't make argumentation ethics about self-ownership, there is no argumentation ethics. The whole point of this, as we talked about earlier, is to demonstrate that you cannot argue for norms that violate self-ownership. You can't argue for socialism. That was the whole point of this argument, and that's what it set out to do, and that's what it tried to establish in the conclusion. And if you're willing to give up control and self-ownership, all you have now is a list of norms that you think an argument is with no conclusion, because you cannot get just from those norms into the conclusion that you must respect self-ownership. You have to somewhere establish in this argument that, are we talking about exclusive control? Are we talking about self-ownership? How did we get to this place? This is why we've harped on it so much. You have to have self-ownership in order to get argumentation ethics. And if that isn't if it isn't necessary to the argument, then there's no reason for it to be included. And so we have to question why it's in there to begin with.
Well said. And even if we're wrong on the control versus property distinction, it all still just boils down to calling somebody a hypocrite. So anyway, that was couched in. That was the real broadside of this video. Okay. Performative contradiction objections. Let's see. Someone might say performative contradictions are valid contradictions because they identify an incoherence between actions and statements. This means we can extrapolate the values that lead to those actions and, when converted into normative statements, determine whether or not they logically contradict the previously stated norm. Christian?
Yeah, I mean, this is what I talked about earlier, but this is a much nicer way of putting the objection. I got a little bit ahead of myself, I guess, with this one. It's mind reading. What we're doing here is we're trying to read other humans' minds. And as far as I'm aware, I can't read minds. Patrick, do you know anybody who can read minds?
My wife. No.
Okay, there we go. No, all right, so we got the one. She might be able to do this. But you have to assume that the action is being done for the sake of the action itself, rather than for any other reason. We talked earlier. Laziness, expediency, convenience, because you like it. I mean, that's completely outside of whether you value the action in and of itself. Maybe you don't value that action in and of itself, and you're trying to make yourself uncomfortable, and so you're doing it anyways. Who knows? You could almost create an infinite number of all equally plausible reasons why you might be performing an action. The only way that you can draw what is supposed to be a valid one-to-one contradiction between someone's actions and a given statement they presented is if you try to convert that action into an equivalent normative statement. And the only way you can do that is by getting out your crystal ball and looking into someone's brain and saying, I now have divined the norm that led you to this action. That's not how humans work, unfortunately.
And there's probably some work and thought and interesting discussions there to talk about the difference between like a praxeological truth that if they took an action, they definitely, necessarily valued that action more than the alternatives, including doing nothing, and extracting a norm from it. That's an interesting discussion that maybe we can have later, but it doesn't apply to this particular argument. All right, I'll read the next prompt for you. The performative contradiction isn't about calling someone a hypocrite. It's about whether or not someone has the ability to argue about something so as to validate it. If a normative statement can't be validated through argumentation, it's useless to us. Go ahead.
Yeah, so the easiest way to put this, and just to be very clear, this is an epistemic nightmare. This is a nightmare about knowledge claims. What we've done, let's just grant all of the rest of everything except for the performative contradiction part. And let's even accept that it's physically impossible to argue for anything other than libertarian norms. What we've done is we've condemned ourselves to only being able to validate a very small subset of all of the potential arguments in a given situation, with absolutely no guarantee from this argument that any of those are true. Personally, I believe libertarian ethics hold true, at least my version of them, right, as we're talking about today. But it is not the case that even if it was true, that through the process of argumentation, it was physically impossible to validate the socialist claims, it does not make you right, and that is a bad place to be. And we should probably come up with a new form of argumentation if this is true. If it is actually true, which it isn't, but if it actually is true, we need a new method of communication. That the take from this is not socialism is dead. The take from this is that we have to reinvent argumentation so that this doesn't happen anymore, because it's not doing its job if this is the case.
One's inability to validate something by argumentation or any means speaks nothing to the truth value of the claim. There's no method currently in our possession to validate whether there is a fat socialist currently orbiting Alpha Centauri. That doesn't mean that there isn't one. All right. Okay.
I think I'll read this next one for you.
Yeah.
Unless you want to prime it a little bit.
Yeah, let me just go ahead and take it, because this is a suspicion, not like something specific. But I know that from Rothbard's attempt at an objective morality through natural law based on man's nature being reason, as he arbitrarily declares. See our Rothbard video for that. I think there will be someone out there, and I'm handing you a hint, people that want to prove me wrong, that there will be an attempt to move the claims covered by argumentation ethics out of the normative column into the empirical objective column in those tables. And they will attempt to move them using an appeal to some sort of objective morality. Some kind of attempt to prove that norms, good and evil, is somehow woven into the nature of reality and are objective. Therefore, it's not normative. Therefore, we can rope, all of the same validity that comes from performative contradictions with empirical claims back in to these oughts. So if we can prove that an ought is objective or empirical, then potentially you would have an inroad into bringing this argumentation ethics argument back from the dead, because I'm pretty sure we just killed it, to be clear. So I'm giving you a hint. I don't think it works. I have yet to see any evidence of objective morality woven into the fabric of morality. But if you can do it, I want to hear it, because that's a really important thing that I want to know about. And if I'm wrong, I want to know, I need to know. But you would have to basically prove that before you could even begin the work of dragging argumentation ethics out of the normative grave that it currently lies in. So I'm giving the people that oppose me a hint. That's probably your best shot. If you can prove objective morality, then that's your best shot at bringing this back.
That's it? That's all?
I mean, that's all. Yeah. It's just something no one's ever been able to do for thousands of years. Yeah. That's probably your best shot.
I believe in you, person out there.
Yeah. Yeah. So again, like, I've spent a lot of time over these past months as we've been thinking about this, trying to figure out ways, like, because if I'm going to criticize something, I'm also going to spend time thinking about how I could close the holes that I'm finding in the argument. Because holy shit, like, if I can solve argumentation ethics and correct, these problems that we find, then again, we have improved libertarian thinking, and that's amazing. And that's like the main way I see it being possible. But again, all you have to do is solve objective morality. Good luck. All right. So, that's it. That's the end of it. That is the argument in a nutshell. If you've watched this far, congratulations. You're a nerd like us. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you've gotten something from it. We're not done with the stream, but I just wanted to, we wanted to put a bookend on it so you'd know when we were kind of done making our arguments and our predicting our defenses. Anything you wanted to say there?
No, honestly, I thought it was going to be longer, so I'm glad we got it in the time frame that we did.
Okay.
Now on to the less formal stuff.
All right. Kojal is fucking trolling us. He said Passio proved it. You just had to watch his natural law seminar. That's great. That's great. All right. Okay. So, this sounds like a shot, but it's not. What is argumentation ethics good for, Christian?
Yeah. So listen, argumentation ethics may be dead, but with a little bit of necromancy, we can still bring back and do some good stuff with the husk that remains. We talked about this idea, the tu quoque, identifying hypocrisy in people, and we mentioned that it's a fallacy to assume that someone's conclusion is false based on them being a hypocrite. I keep couching all of my language, but I want to make sure I'm very specific so that no one loses me here. I see a future where argumentation ethics still has a role in a kind of activist street epistemology way, where you're talking to normal everyday humans about what they believe, how they're acting, and how they might be able to actualize those things. Now, this is a completely different usage than what argumentation ethics is intended for. In fact, it's almost the opposite usage, where argumentation ethics was not created in order to convince socialists to be libertarians. It was to make some observations about what we can and cannot argue about. But in this world where the performative contradiction doesn't hold the value that's needed in order to make that claim that Hoppe was trying to, there's still a world where you can talk about how people's actions aren't necessarily agreeing with the statements that they're making, and try to figure out why that is in a way that's both charitable to their position and can enlighten them perhaps towards some predilections that they may not even realize that they had. How many people do you think have actually sat down and thought about, well, why am I arguing instead of fighting people? It doesn't, again, this is not a logically rigorous thing as we've just demonstrated, but I think it can be useful still for reaching out to people and getting them to think more about how they're engaging with other humans and why they choose to engage that way. Because I think a lot of libertarianism and a lot of the power and appeal of it is realizing that the best interactions in our lives with other people are those that are nonviolent. And argumentation, can be an extension of that. Why aren't you just beating me with a club? I think this can fit perfectly into that slot still.
Calling someone a hypocrite is usually really powerful. People do not like to be shown to be hypocritical. And so if you are able to use argumentation ethics to convince someone that they're being hypocritical in their argumentation, you can still do a lot with that for people. It might not be, like Christian said, a strong truth value carrying thing, but people do not like to be hypocrites. And therefore, there's still a lot of utility in argumentation ethics. And that's I don't want to call it a bone that we're trying to throw here, but that's a very real benefit that you could continue to. You don't have to stop talking to people about argumentation ethics and the performative contradictions that they're caught in. We just need to have a better understanding of what we're actually doing when we call someone a hypocrite, let's say. Okay. I'm gonna. Can I give this one to you? One of my kids is having something happen. I will be right back. Do you mind?
Go
Christian?
for it.
All right.
Yeah. All right. So let's just address the elephant in the room here, right? A lot of this conversation that we've had to have has been built on the back of Twitter bros. There are a lot of people on Twitter. If you guys are on Twitter, I'm sure you've seen them, who do not understand argumentation ethics. They just don't. And on one hand, I don't blame them, because it took us months of going through primary, secondary sources, etc., in order to get to where we are with our understanding of argumentation ethics. And that meant reading a lot outside of the primary source. It meant talking to a lot of different people about it. But this is like a plea. This isn't, we've got to police people better on how they talk about argumentation ethics, because on its face, if we just took what Twitter was saying about argumentation ethics, just assumed it was true, right? We were like, let's compile all of these statements that these proponents of argumentation ethics have been making, and let's do a video on why all of that's wrong. This would have been a 10-minute video where we talked about the definition. We would have done the intro. We would have talked about what the definition of a moral philosophy is, and then we would have talked about how argumentation ethics doesn't meet that, and then we would have gone home. Some people probably would have appreciated a stream like that, but that's not what we wanted to do. One, there was almost certainly more to this than what was being told to us. So good on us, I guess, for having the intuition to go decide and actually do the work in. But from there, there's no other real way to say it. We wasted a lot of time chasing lines of thought that went nowhere, that are perpetuated by people who have absolutely no idea what they're talking about. And they outnumber the people who do 100 to 1. And this is unique in a sense to Hoppe. Like, there's all sorts of people who talk about libertarian philosophy who don't get it, but I don't feel like I feel bad for Hoppe, right? Like, we just spent all this time talking about why argumentation ethics doesn't follow. And I still feel bad for him by the way that a lot of people represent his ideas. Every person who's ever talked about argumentation ethics as a moral philosophy is not doing Hoppe a service. You are doing him an active disservice. Please don't do that anymore. It's not good. Okay. And I know I'm sitting here ranting into the microphone to a bunch of people who probably have stopped listening or clicked off the video a long time ago. But if you see somebody out there who's talking about the performative contradiction and trying to shut down other people's arguments as if their statements are false, or if you see people talking about how Hoppe created a moral foundation for libertarianism and argumentation ethics, no, stop, bad. Tell them, point them to this video, give them a timestamp, tell them to watch me yell into my microphone at them to please stop. Hoppe doesn't like it. I can't say that. I'm sure he doesn't, actually. I'm pretty damn sure he doesn't like it that people are doing his argument. But
yeah, I feel motivated to defend Hoppe from his proponents. I'm like, no, I disagree that Hoppe is onto something here, but what you're doing is not right. Yeah. And I'm sure the people that actually understand are feeling the same. So we commiserate there.
Exactly.
All right, cool. So, therefore, what? Let's wrap up, and then we'll answer some questions that I'm seeing come in. So, So I think we have put argumentation ethics to bed in a pretty fundamental way by addressing the performative contradiction as sort of an ad hom. But tomorrow, there's not going to be any less libertarians in the world because of this video. Libertarianism, its ideas, its people, its activists are going to continue existing tomorrow. We have not killed libertarianism. I mean, hell, everything we're working for here is to grow it and to refine it, to make it bigger and better. This is not a stopping point. Should be a beginning point. So hopefully, if you are a proponent of argumentation ethics, and hopefully if we have convinced you of some of the problems with it, don't stop, don't give up, don't be discouraged. Join us in continuing to fight to better all libertarian thought in the world. We want the world to be free. We're just going to need to keep working on ideas. Don't stop here. Don't we can't rest on Hoppa's work. Our work is not done. There are other philosophies, antisubjectivism.com, where people are working on. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh no, it has to be said, right? Like if we didn't say it, someone would say, "Oh, what have you guys built? You've done nothing," right? So like, we have to say it. It's like, on one hand, I don't want to be dancing on the grave of argumentation ethics, but like, look, every problem that's been brought up about argumentation ethics, I feel like we've rationally, reasonably, and quite eloquently, if I do say so myself, solved. And so do not, don't be afraid to click on a couple links, go check out Anti-Subjectivism. And if you disagree with us about anything, to come talk to us about it. I'm open to someone telling me for the 8th time that I don't understand argumentation ethics. They might be onto something. Do like a little bit of a what's the optimistic induction here? I've been wrong like 7 times before when I've asked people, so maybe the 8th one's going to come around here, right? Just make sure that if you have disagreements with anything that we've talked about, that you come ready for a good, healthy chat. No screaming matches, no insult slinging. None of us are here to tear anybody down. We're here to make each other better thinkers, better philosophers, better libertarians, better humans. That's the whole reason we're doing this.
Yep. So again, I'll say it one last time. If you disagree or have clear, cogent, prepared counter-arguments, we want to hear them. Please don't do one of those stupid talking head YouTube takedown videos where you jump cut us up and make fun of us. You just make yourself look retarded. You have a genuine, polite, standing, open invitation to appear on the show to prove us wrong. If I'm wrong, I want to know. Come take the invitation. Don't go make YouTube videos that we'll probably never see on your YouTube channel. I mean, if you want, you do what you want, obviously, but please at least come to us first. Let's talk through it. And again, that goes for the semi-anonymous cartoon YouTubers that won't put their real names behind their positions. Even you have an open invitation, a limited open invitation to come on the show to talk through it. Okay, so I want to thank people. Number one, I want to thank Disenthrall supporters, you beautiful few people that help us pay for things like our producer, Fallstar, who is the one you should contact, by the way, if you want to take advantage of the open invitation. Join our Discord server, links in the description. Speak to our producer, Fallstar, if you'd like to take us up on that open invitation. And anyway, thank you to the supporters who help make it possible to pay a few pennies to Fallstar, who does work to help organize guests and deal with shows and calendars, and it's a mess. So thanks to the supporters, thanks to Fallstar, thanks to Hoppa for being one of the few people that do the extremely hard work of writing new libertarian thought and sharing it with the world. Very few people do it. Very few people. Hardly anybody does it as well as Hoppa has done. So thanks to Hoppa for that. I want to also thank, and you can jump here anytime if you want, Christian. I want to thank also Stefan Kinsella, who has done a whole lot of writing and speaking and talking and debating and thinking around these topics. Go ahead.
By word count, I read probably 3 times as much Stefan Kinsella in preparation for this than I did Hoppa or anybody else. Just because he has so much information out there on it. So if you want to see what I personally think are some of the best representations of argumentation ethics out there, go look up his work. You know, if you want to fact check some of the ways we presented it, I think that would be a pretty good place to look. But
I want to thank a couple people that really put in some time with us on the back end to challenge our critiques and actually talk through it. And one of these people spent hours. So I want to thank Casimir, and I want to thank Robin the State. Those are their names, for putting in some work behind the scenes, sometimes significant work. And as always, we must thank Casiones Bradinian. He will know who he is. Okay,
of course.
Cool. All right, so that's really that's the end. So let's take we had a question here. If you have any questions, we're about to end the stream, so get your questions in now. Josh for Liberty asks, question: am I hearing you use the term rights? I am hearing you use the term rights a lot in this discussion. Do you still maintain that rights are reciprocal agreements between consenting individuals? If so, are you suggesting that self-ownership requires a right unless someone has alleged to forfeit their self-ownership? In other words, if an individual does not consent to forfeit their self-ownership, then no one else has the right to claim ownership of that non-consenting individual. If anyone does take someone else as a slave, that does not mean they had a right to do so. Just trying to understand your current use of rights. Just making sure I'm applying your use of rights as you intend while listening. Christian, you want to take that?
Yeah, mutually reciprocal agreements. That's the fundamental principle of rights in anti-subjectivism. I think it's a pretty solid one. When we talk about the right to something, we're talking about an agreement that we have with other humans that is going to be reciprocated. So I'll say, hey, look, I own these things. I have this claim to them. We establish a property system with norms that allows us to as easily as possible, go through disputes with people. And I am sure one of those agreements will include our bodies, and that we won't mess with each other's bodies as our property. However, the big distinction, and I think perhaps what you might be going for here, is that it is possible in a world full of state of nature beings, if you will, people who are not engaged in these mutually reciprocal agreements, where there is no real concept of self-ownership. There's no real concept of property. It's something that you can hold in your head, sure, but you need another person to be engaged in this agreement with you in order for the word to mean anything. It's kind of like saying, people have like a right to privacy. You'll hear people use terms like that all the time. I don't believe there is such a thing as a right to privacy. But if you made an agreement with somebody that said you won't spy on each other and you won't, peek through curtains and stuff like that, you could have something effectively like a right to privacy. But if you're the one person, nobody else has made an agreement with you to limit how they use their body property, and you talk about your right to privacy, it means nothing. So it's a long way of saying, yes, I think that's a pretty good summarization of how we view rights. Yep.
If no one reciprocates your right to property with you, then do you have property? Or are you just yelling at the wind? Okay, cool. Well, that's it, everybody. Thanks for watching. This is definitely one of the most in-depth videos that we've done on this channel today. So if you've stuck around this far, you're a baller. Please support the channel so we can toss a few extra shekels, fall stars way at disenthrall.me/support. Somebody asked where they can follow you, Christian. You want to give your Twitter or whatever?
Oh, yeah. What is my Twitter handle? Oh, it's at the Swolosopher. It's a name I will grow into. I promise. I'm working on it. You can see me over there, and you can catch me on Disenthrall. I'm in the Discord sometimes too, and we can chat about stuff then and play Star Citizen.
We have been playing a lot of Star Citizen lately. We've been playing a lot of games lately. So if you fancy yourself a gamer as well, join our Discord server. We're pretty much on there almost every night, playing something or another. Wasting our money in Star Citizen.
Bought a Starfighter Inferno, so
What'd you buy?
That's not good.
What?
I bought the Inferno.
Which one's that?
Bad, but I like it. It's the one with the size 7 cannon. It's a capital ship destroyer.
What? Hold on.
Yep.
I'm
Size
looking
7
this over.
autocannon.
Inferno.
It sucks on anything but big ships. And I bought it because I was like, man, that's a cool gun.
I have the Ares Ion.
The Ion?
Yeah.
We should duo.
Fallstar said that he tried the Inferno and it kicks like a mule and he didn't have fun. So do you like it?
Yeah, I thought it was pretty cool.
All right, cool. All right, everybody. Thanks for watching. We'll be in Discord probably the rest of the evening if you want to chat with us or whatever. And again, contact Fallstar on our Discord if you want to take us up on that open invitation to show us how we're wrong. We'd love to know. Thanks for participating in the conversation of libertarian thought with us today. You guys are awesome. Anything else you want to say, Christian?
Everybody, take it easy.
Peace out. Peace out. I still, it's been years. I have no way to end the show. Probably.
No. We know what the exit is. You know what the outro is.
It's just always like awkward and it trails off until I hit stop recording.
Oh, you've been disenthralled. Oh God.
I'm still streaming. Oh, okay. Now
you are.
Yeah.
Oh, shit. Oh. Damn. You got me. You finally got